So thank you to everyone for joining us today. This is the third webinar of the e-commerce behind the tech scene series. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome. And if you've attended one of the webinars before, welcome back. I would like to give you a quick overview of the format of the talk before we move on to introductions. In the first part, we'll dive into our guest David's experience and insight into the e-commerce industry. We have prepared some very interesting questions for him, and there would be some time for Q&A at the end. If you've joined us on some of the previous webinars, you might notice that this is a slightly different format. We're going for a fireside chat format in quotation. And the goal is to open it up to more of a discussion, ideas sharing, etc. So all your questions, comments, experiences, and thoughts are very welcome. Feel free to share them. To do so, there is a Q&A option in Zoom. So you can post your question there. You can look through the questions already posted and upvote the ones you find most interesting. And if you want to ask a question or share your experience by talking instead of typing, you can use the raise your hand option through the bottom of your console. And we'll allow you to speak as soon as possible as we go through all of the questions in the Q&A section later on. Moving on to some introductions. My name is Albena Krosteva. I am head of growth at Zartis, and I'll be the moderator for the talk. Our guest today is David Glick, CTO at Flexe. We'll start with a very short background on Zartis as organizer. So Zartis is a software services company with 100+ engineers distributed across Europe. We provide nearshoring, extended development, and consulting services, enabling companies to build software in a faster, better way. As a company, we have extensive expertise in the e-commerce technology domain, and the purpose of those webinars is to build on that expertise and learn from our guests and speakers. I'm very happy to present our speaker today, David Glick, CTO at Flexe. Thanks for joining us, David.
Thanks for having me.
David has spent more than 20 years at the forefront of e-commerce technology. He spent a good amount of those years at Amazon, where as VP of Fulfillment Technology, he oversaw the development and functionality of the technology within Amazon's fulfillment centers, as well as the technology for Amazon's transportation systems. Today, he's CTO at Flexe. Flexe is reinventing warehousing and fulfillment to optimize global delivery of goods. They match companies in need of warehouse and fulfillment space with building owners who have excess capacity to let on a temporary basis. Most recently, Flexe has raised 43 million in a Series B funding round and growing a lot. I imagine this session will aim to deep dive into David's expertise, experience, and firsthand view of the sector to understand where e-commerce tech is coming from and where it's going. So to deep dive into the questions, we'll start with a few broader ones before diving into the more specific and technical ones. So David, you have a very interesting career path from a PhD in physics to top positions in the e-commerce technology sector. I've outlined some of the highlights of your experience, but can you maybe walk us through your career path and background in a bit more detail?
Yeah, thanks. Thank you for having me as well. I took what I would consider a non-traditional career path. I went to graduate school for physics and found that I wasn't a very good physicist. My wife was actually a very good biochemist, and she got her PhD. We both did, and we decided we would move to Boston, Seattle, or San Francisco, wherever she could find a job. And so she found a job at University of Washington, and we ended up living in my friend's basement until eventually one of my other friends worked at Amazon. She got my resume in the pile as a junior project manager. And so my first several years at Amazon was standing up new warehouses In 1999, we stood up 5 warehouses, which was 3 million square feet, which was like unheard of at the time in terms of growing. We 10x'd our fulfillment capacity, and it turned out that now today they do that 5 warehouses in a week. So we thought it was a big deal back then, but it shows how much they've grown. In 2004, my boss told me, if you're not in software, this is kind of a dead end because that's where all the growth is. And so another one of her peers said, hey, come work for me. I have lots of software developers. I need people who can get stuff done. And so I moved over into building tools for our retail buyers. The most interesting of which was a pricing system where you'd have the computers set prices rather than having humans set prices on all of the retail 1P SKUs. I did a few other things. I worked on international. For those of you in Europe, which I think is most people, Amazon now has a single seller account, which allows you to sell in UK, France, Italy, Spain, Germany, and that was one of my projects. And then in 2012, I had the great opportunity to move back into ops, leading the fulfillment center systems team, which we call Amazon Fulfillment Technology. So I did that for a few years, got promoted to VP, and then expanded that role into transportation. And people may have heard of Amazon Logistics, which is about 1 year away from being the world's biggest package carrier delivery. And I was a founding VP in Amazon Logistics. I left in 2018 and retired. Found that wasn't that interesting because there was nobody to hang out with because they were all working. And so someone from Madrona, who's a VC in Seattle, called me and said, hey, you need to meet these guys at Flexe. They've got a huge market, a great product market fit. The product needs some work, and we could use your help on that. And so about 1.5 years ago, I went back to work just as they were raising Series B.
Well, very good to have you back out of retirement. It sounds like a more interesting world. Yes. So I suppose you extensively kind of worked in the e-commerce industry, and you've seen it grow and change and evolve over the past 20 years. What are the main changes you've observed happen over the years? So this could be any specific shifts in terms of how technology is developed, but also the focus and priorities and consumer expectations, I assume, are vastly different.
Yeah, well, I like to tell the story of when I was growing up, and I would see advertisements for KTEL records, and the record was $11.99 plus $6.99 shipping, and it would take 4 to 6 weeks to get to you. And I never really understood, why it was, $6.49 shipping just to put something in a box, and who knew? But then in 98, I joined Amazon, and they were $2.99 shipping, and they ship it, usually ships out of the warehouse 24 to 48 hours, but we don't know when it's going to get to you. And then in sort of 2002 came Super Saver shipping, right? Free shipping, but it'll take you a week or two. Then 2004 was 2-day shipping for free with Prime. And then, a few years ago, Amazon launched Prime Now. And so that's 2-hour shipping for free. And so, one of the things, and obviously I'm biased towards the shipping industry, but one of the things we've seen is just a up level of services, both in shipping and everywhere else, because of technology. And it allows, smaller and smaller batch sizes and more coordination that humans couldn't handle the complexity, but the machines can. From a technology standpoint, what we saw 20 years ago was long waterfall type of software development lifecycle where you're trying to plan out 6 months at a time, often using C, C++. And Agile came along in the early 2000s, and where I was at Amazon, we let everybody choose how they wanted to do their development. Each software manager, there was no top down. Everybody got to choose what they wanted, but it turns out everybody ended up with the same thing, which is Agile with 2-week sprints and scrums every day. And so I think that's a big difference from where we were with big software development teams with monolithic software 20 years ago.
Very good. You mentioned kind of the huge difference in shipping times and the technology that has enabled that. Could you maybe expand kind of what are the main, is it a question of purely automating the process, or kind of what is the technology that has enabled this exponential decrease in shipping time?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things to think about is that, let's go back to the KTEL records example. They're pushing one record at a time, and they take 4 to 6 weeks of orders, and then they pull a pallet next to the shipping and pack them, and the cost of a pick is like a nickel, right? Because you're just pick, put it in a box, send it, and then, you get better shipping rates because you sent out a big batch. At Amazon, we said batches are bad. And so, how do we reduce those batch sizes? And it is by technology, meaning, in many warehouses, even today, people don't know where stuff is in the warehouse. They just say, oh yeah, I remember I put it over there somewhere, I'll go find it. If you need a pallet of potato chips, go find it over there, a pallet of diapers, and they're all kind of the same. Amazon turned that on its head with, we called it random stow, where you put goods wherever you could find them in the shelving, and then you have a database which tells you where every one of those units are. So you can send a person to each of those spots when you need to ship them. And then, fast forward ahead 15 years, you don't send a person to pick an item anymore. You have the computer send a robot to lift up the shelf, bring it to the human, so the human's standing in one place picking items, rather than having to walk 15 miles a day. And so you go from, walk 60 seconds, pick one item, walk another 40 seconds, pick two items, to pick an item every 5 seconds or 10 seconds. And so there's hundreds of those technology solutions which have moved things to faster. But the goal is that you go from click to order or click to ship. So you click a button and it's in a box on its way out of the warehouse within half an hour. And that all means there's lots of pieces which computers can do in a millisecond, which humans would have to write something down or send an email. And so every time you remove a human from the equation, from corporate, you reduce the time it takes to do things.
Very interesting. So the key to 2 hours deliveries are robots and pure automation.
Yeah, and robots are super fancy, but looking at all of all the humans or the systems that need to touch an order between the time the order is made and the time it gets out of the building, those could have 1 minute, 2 minute, 3 minute latencies, and if you have 10 of those, you're looking at a half an hour there. And so you go through each of those pieces of the pipeline, say, how do we get this from 3 minutes to 30 seconds or from 3 minutes to 5 seconds? And so those are interesting challenges, which you don't need any fancy robots, you don't need high capital, you just need smart engineers and thoughtfulness.
Awesome. Fantastic. So to get a little bit more into kind of the more software aspects of building those systems, you have worked in very high volume and high stakes environments. So from a technical point of view, what are the main considerations to scale correctly and sustainably when building an e-commerce business?
Yeah, thanks. One of the things that I always try to do, and we always did, both at Amazon and Flexe, is sort of work backwards from the customer. So, what is the closest point that the software developer has to the customer? It's often deployment, like putting things into production. So if you think about that, you can have a monolith with many people checking into it, and then you have to deploy that. You have to coordinate that, and maybe you deploy once a week, and you've got 50 check-ins that you all have to test. And that's destined to be a disaster. I was, I don't know if lucky is the right word. The worst job I ever had was the deployment manager at Amazon. And it was my job to make sure that each week we would deploy software to the website. And when I started, we went 6 weeks in a row not being able to deploy, and got all the way up to Jeff B. And the path we took, two paths. Well, one was I wanted to move from weekly deployment cycles to bi-weekly, so we'd have more time to test. And my VP said, Dave, you're thinking about it all wrong. You need to go to twice a week, or you need to go to every day, because that way you're testing less changes at a time. And what's easy to test is one change. What's hard to test is many changes. And you'd have developers stomping all over each other. And so if you have a monolith and you're growing your development team, you are going to have more and more troubles getting the software tested and deployed. And so we made two changes. One was chop the monolith into many small services. People call those microservices or service-oriented architecture. We just call them services. My favorite example is the guy who was in charge of the catalog. He said, my job is to tell you all information about a SKU. So if you send me, I'm going to build a service and you send me a SKU, I will tell you the weight, the dimensions, the price, all these things, and then don't ever talk to me other than that. Only communicate with me through the APIs. So that was one piece that is all the rage now, service-oriented architecture. The second, which I think is probably the most important thing we can do to improve quality, is continuous deployment. So rather than have weekly or biweekly or monthly or even quarterly, Oracle does quarterly patches. You don't want to do that. You want to go the other way, which is every single piece of code that gets checked in has an automated test suite run, and then it goes directly to production once it passes. And that makes it easy to know if you break something, we know it was that change, rather than, oh, we've got 20 changes that were all batched together.
Fantastic. And I suppose what would be your advice to either engineering managers or kind of engineers trying to implement those changes or optimize those processes in the best way? So I suppose the main things you mentioned are around kind of make sure you have a microservices architecture or service-oriented architecture and proper automated deployment. So if someone is either transitioning into those areas or trying to optimize what's already there, kind of what's your advice to them?
Yeah, just do it. There's a classic blog post by a guy named Eric Ries, R-I-E-S, where he talks about all the reasons not to do continuous deployment. Or it was Timothy Fitz, I think, and Eric referenced it. They worked at a company called IMVU, and they were the pioneers of this. And they said, here are all the reasons people are going to tell you why not to do it. Oh, we don't have enough testing. It's too important not to have a human oversight, all of these things. And what I found is when I've demanded my teams move to continuous deployment, every one of them comes to me and says, oh, we didn't believe this would work, but it's such a godsend. The engineers are so happy. And they'd always say first, we don't have enough tests. Well, let's put a smoke test at the end, a sanity test, and have minimal testing throughout the pipeline. You roll things out. If they break, great. Roll them back quickly, and no one will notice. And then you can go add more tests, and once people are bought in, you can make it a much more robust pipeline. But start out with the simplest thing you can. We had at Flex, we had people tell us, oh, this is too hard. We have a monolith, so on and so on. We put actually we put 4 engineers on it for a month, which is a big investment. But at the end of that month, we had continuous deployment, and rather than people complaining that the test environment is out of date, or I'm going to have the Slack channels were always like, you deploy first, then I'll deploy, and then do these things. Now it's discussions about test coverage and how do we move faster, and we deploy about 10 times a day now. When I go into the deployment Slack channel, I can see 10 successful deployments a day. And so people will always tell you why what you're proposing is not a good idea. And it turns out that mostly change is good and people will adapt to it. And so, push forward. I had a friend who described the Dave Glick deployment method as dig a hole and see who fills it in. So, I would sometimes push things out of equilibrium. And, most engineers are well-intentioned and don't want things to break and want to provide solutions. And so they will say, oh, Dave, you screwed this up, but here are the 3 things I'm going to do to bring us back into a state where we can survive and, in a state forward of where we were before.
Awesome. Fantastic. I suppose kind of another question which relates to that. I assume kind of the technical considerations for an e-commerce company would be slightly different from a retail company who is trying to transition into an e-commerce offering. So what do you have any kind of technical advice for the latter case?
One of the things that that came up several times is should we build new versus should we improve what we have? And the answer is it's almost always better to improve what you have. And the reason is, especially if it's internal, lots of companies have third-party software that they've bought. And my background is all in building first-party software so that we can control it. And when it breaks, we know how to fix it. We don't have to get tech support on the line, and we don't have to have patches that take 6 months to get here and $50,000 change orders. If you can do things internally, that has a bunch of benefits. What we found, every engineer, like there's never an engineer who took on a new challenge, joined a new team and said, everything's great here. The software is well written, it's well documented. And so, all the engineers are going to say, what we have here is crap. We should just start over. And what that misses is that crap, that spaghetti, has many, many years of sub 2s or sub 1s, which were corrected and maybe not well documented, but all of that legacy knowledge is in the system, right? It's been codified in our algorithms and in our systems. And when you start over, you end up with having that whole learning process over again. And so if you can do things piecemeal and, break something out, build APIs between that and what you have, and break the next thing out, that's a much better transition plan than, oh, we're just going to either buy new third-party software or we're going to write our own and it's completely separate. So, bite off bite-sized chunks and do things iteratively.
Awesome. Some very good advice. One more question. You've said in an interview, and I hope I'm quoting you correctly, Amazon is first and foremost a logistics company more than an e-commerce. Could you maybe expand on that, on what you mean by that and why logistics is so important?
Yeah, and obviously I've got bias because that's my area, but people argued for many years, are we a retail company? Is Amazon a retail company or is Amazon a technology company? And it's both of those. But what we've seen in the last 5 years, since Dave Clark has been in charge of, in maybe the last 8 years in operations, like Amazon has become a logistics company. They have 200 buildings, 200 big buildings in the US and, many thousands of buildings across the country. And what you see is, lots of people have stood up websites. Lots of people do automated merchandising, but the physical, the sheer amount of capital that Amazon spent, and that, which is allowing them to go from super savers 7-day shipping to 2-day shipping to 1-day shipping as a standard practice, and then 2-hour or 1-hour Prime Now shipping, is driving incredible growth. When they announced and they spent money going from 2-day shipping to 1-day shipping, saw a 2% acceleration, a 200 basis point acceleration in their year-over-year results. And to do that, if Walmart or Target or Home Depot or Lowe's wants to do that, that's many billions of dollars of investment. What we're seeing during COVID times is there's not enough carrier capacity. Even if Walmart scales up its stores and Amazon scales up its fulfillment, there's just not enough carrier capacity. And so Amazon invested 5 years ago, 6 years ago in Amazon Logistics, and now they are in control of their destiny. And what we've seen is they delivered 50% of their own packages in 2019. To date, in 2020, they're doing 67% of their packages, which is like another couple billion packages that they've scaled up into. And if you think about UPS and FedEx and Postal Service and Deutsche Post and Royal Mail, none of those carriers have the ability to scale like Amazon did.
Very, very interesting. I hope that's not discouraging to the smaller e-commerces out there of what they're going against. To talk a little bit about Flex, what is Flex and what role does it play in scaling an e-commerce business?
Yeah, I'll share the origin story, which brought me aboard, which was my boss was at a cocktail party. He was the founder, and someone came up to him and said, hey, I'm about to sign a 5-year lease for warehouse space I don't need. Because he was a small merchant. He needed about 20,000 square feet of warehouse space, but he had to sign this long-term 5-year lease, and he had to guess what his forecast was for 5 years out, and he had no idea. And so he said to Carl, if you could provide me something where I can pay for just what I use, I'd love that. And so, Carl's expanded that into like, how do we debatchify the 3PL space? Instead of having 5-year or 3-year contracts with $1 million of upfront capital and a big license fee for the warehouse management system and a big integration fee, how do we do away with all of that and kind of cloudify the physical world? And so, just as AWS, before AWS, you had to go to a data center or a co-location facility, either build your own data center or go to a co-location facility. Previously, you either had to build your own warehouse network, which is effectively impossible if you're not Walmart, Target, Lowe's, Home Depot, Amazon, so on. You had to go to a 3PL who had these onerous terms, and now you can come to us and say, I need surge capacity over Christmas, or I'd like to build a 15-node network so I can have 1-day shipping, and we work with a network of 3PLs so that you're not locked into oh, we have 3 warehouses, so this is where you can work with us, or we have 10 warehouses. Amazon has 200 warehouses across the U.S. and many dozen in Europe as well, and we have 1,400 warehouses. So 1,400 for us, 200 for Amazon. Walmart has 30-ish fulfillment centers. Target has less than that. So being able to put inventory close to the customer is the most important piece of your economics if you're an e-commerce player. And because if you want to do 1-day or 2-day shipping, and this is probably a bigger problem in the U.S. than Europe because Europe's smaller, but if you want to do 1-day or 2-day shipping across a continent, you're going to be putting it on someone's planes, on UPS's planes. You're going to be putting your package there, and that's super expensive, 3, 4, 5 times the cost of ground. If you can forward deploy inventory so it's close to customers, then you can do 1-day shipping or same-day shipping, all on the ground, and it's fairly cheap.
Awesome. So just to confirm, your services are only available in the US, so we have to disappoint our European listeners at the moment.
Yes, sadly, and this is something hopefully will expand over the next few years, but sadly we're in the US only right now. So if you're a big, you're a big enterprise player in Europe and you want a foot in the door in the US without spending tens of millions of dollars, you can experiment using us for basically 0 upfront and pay as you go.
Awesome. Very good. So I think it's time to open a little bit the floor to our attendees as well. So just a reminder to everyone, you're very welcome to ask your questions. There are 2 main ways. You can either raise your hand and I'll give you the floor to speak, or you can also type in your question in the Q&A section. It should be at the bottom of your screen. So please feel free to share your questions with us. And while some first questions come in, Dave, I'm curious about your opinion on some new trends we're seeing or that are very much associated with e-commerce, some kind of buzzwords, some of them to a certain extent. But I guess, and this comes from a question someone asked in one of our previous webinars. What is your take on refillable products and kind of circular retail? Is the sector ready? Will it be ready? Or it's not even a good solution?
Yeah, I mean, what we've seen is some success from, I'll give you an example. There's a cleaning products company that's organic, and they'll send you a kit with all of the containers you need for your Windex replacement and your Murphy's oil soap replacement, and then they'll send you a little tablet, and you're seeing this similar to the Tide Pods, where they then, once you've had the first shipment, they just send you the tablet each time, so they save on shipping. They're not shipping water. They're not burning fuel to ship, and so I think that's pretty successful. If they want you to ship the container back and they'll refill it for you, that seems like crazy time. We have do you mind if there's a question in the chat? Do you mind if I answer that?
Yeah, of course.
About reverse logistics. The thing about reverse logistics is, when you're doing forward logistics, everything is sort of flowing in one direction. You got high volume, and everything was packed well by the vendor, and you charge the vendor back if they don't label it correctly. And that's a very well-worn path. The reverse logistics, even that has a bunch of defect, 1 to 2% defect rate. Reverse logistics, you're getting things back from customers and you can't charge them back, and they don't know how to pack things. And so basically you've got sort of 100% defect rate when it's coming into your building. And so, Happy Returns, Returnly, these folks specialize in that. Rent the Runway is the best, I think, in the world at reverse logistics. They're basically the world's biggest dry cleaning company, right? And they specialize that, and that's what they specialize in that, and that's what they do. And it sounds like Happy Returns and these others do as well. Flex, we have basic returns capability, but I think to scale it and to make it something we're proud of, we either have to partner with one of these folks or have a pizza team, have a service team that's fully focused on that. And that's probably not a 2020, or that's for sure not a 2020 thing.
Very good. One more question from the audience. Based on your experience and your actual position, what is the area of e-commerce? What is the area that e-commerce companies disregard usually, and you would recommend to focus on? In other words, what are the most frequent errors that growing companies do in the e-commerce industry? Many errors that your customers are having at Flex.
Retail is pretty simple, and it's simple but not easy. Like, you want low prices, big selection, and fast delivery. And I think everybody's on board with low prices, and that's a very easy thing to change. We change prices millions of times a day at Amazon. It's moving electrons, right? You're publishing a new price. Everybody I think has their head around that. Big selection. If you add more products, you will get more customers to your site. You'll sell more stuff. That makes sense. Fast delivery or customer convenience is much more amorphous. And Amazon made it the centerpiece in some ways for the last 5 years of their product. Prime's been around for the last 15 years. And while Prime has free videos and lots of features, the core feature continues to be fast shipping. It's really differentiated. But that takes a long time, right? Prices you can change overnight. Selection, you can call a vendor and you can have things in a month. Fast shipping, you have to build buildings and you have to deploy capital and you have to hire humans, or have a partner that does that. And so we believe that Flex can help you leapfrog that time scale. Instead of taking you 5, 10, 15 years to build a fulfillment network, you can do it overnight, or in 6 weeks. We can stand you up 15 nodes in 6 weeks. And so we think that's a great opportunity. Did that answer the question?
The question is from Andres. So Andres, please follow up if you want David to expand on something. One more question in the meantime. Can you talk about artificial intelligence and machine learning and what role they're playing in the field of e-commerce logistics management? What are the prospects of AI and ML for the future?
Yeah, I am a contrarian with AI and ML. Like, everybody talks about it, and people have a .ai at the end of their business. And I told this joke on LinkedIn once. It was, it's AI when you're talking to investors, it's ML when you're talking to engineers, and it's a spreadsheet when you're actually doing it. And so unless you're working at sort of Amazon scale for inventory management, I don't think you need AI. You can inventory plan for 5 nodes or 10 nodes with hundreds of SKUs. Even at tens or hundreds of thousands of SKUs and 15 nodes, you can build a spreadsheet which tells you how much I put on the East Coast, how much I put on the West Coast, and only recently have people been moving into AI and ML. It turns out that those are non-deterministic, which is even worse, right? Because you're like, there's a 96% probability that this thing's going to show up at this time, rather than I'm going to put it there. And so I may end up, to be fair, like Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, and Elon Musk all say that AI is like going to change the face of the world, and like, who am I to argue with those guys? But in the near term, I think it's a red herring to make your fulfillment and sort of logistics better.
Fair enough. You don't need to argue with them. They argue between themselves often enough, I would say. While we're waiting for more questions from the audience, kind of a few more on the new trends we keep hearing about. Another one is drone deliveries. What is the state of drone deliveries at the moment, and do you feel it's going to pick up?
You know, the total number of drone deliveries, as far as I know, is in the hundreds from the beginning of time. And you know, there's probably someone who's doing it at maybe a little higher scale than that. But you know, there's billions of packages, tens of billions of packages being delivered on trucks and planes and cars. And you know, as cost is driven out of that, either by forward deploying inventory, or by getting scale, or by moving to crowdsourced drivers, or having, you know, sidewalk robots, or having autonomous vehicles, all of those things will drive costs out of the traditional model. And so I think it's going to be hard for drone delivery to be economical in the next several years. That's my own bias. So I could be wrong, but you know, you can do, if you can get the last mile down to $1 or $2 per unit, then the drones are less and less interesting.
Fair enough. What about blockchain? Specifically, I think there's a lot of buzz around blockchain being used in supply chains.
Yeah, we were talking earlier and I was saying blockchain is the RFID of the 21st century. Like RFID the idea was, oh, you know, you can put a sticker with an antenna on a pallet or a case or each, and you know, track it through its whole journey, and you can read to it and write to it, and so you know where it's been. But like, we have a database, we put a barcode on it, we put a license plate on it, and we put those all things in a database. You don't have to store it locally. And so blockchain will probably be very good for, you know, countries where people don't trust each other and or financial transactions. But you know, if you are buying inventory from a vendor who you have a relationship with, and you're sending it to a customer who you have a relationship with, I'm not sure blockchain adds a ton of value.
So where there is trust, there's no need for blockchain, I suppose.
I think so. By the way, I'm a Bitcoin holder, so I'm betting that there's some at least speculative opportunity there. But you know, we've talked about blockchain for years and never found a good practical use for it.
Fair enough. So we, one question coming in from the audience. How big does your inventory need to be for Flex to be an option?
You know, we start at, you know, we look at $5,000 a month of fees as our minimum. You know, so if you're a $1 to $10 million seller on Amazon, or you know, and your logistics costs are 5,000 or more, that's kind of our lower limit. Smaller than that, or it's $5,000 per site. So you know, potentially tens of thousands of dollars if you want a multi-site network. There are smaller companies. One's called Deliverer with 2 R's, who specialize in merchants who sell on Walmart, merchants who sell on Amazon, and they have complete self-service registration. And so you don't have to talk to anybody, you just send your inventory in, similar to FBA. So for small sellers, it pains me, but I you know, refer people away from us. You know, as you get scale, you know, if you're doing 20,000 or 50,000 square feet, that's when we're able to be a little more robust than some of the other players in this space, a lot more robust, and scale up to, you know, tens of thousands of units a day per site.
Fantastic. A new question, what would be a disruptor in the near future? COVID has certainly brought disruption. Are there other parts of retail waiting for another disruption?
Interesting. Well, COVID certainly jumped, you know, we went from 6 to 16% e-commerce penetration in the US in 10 years, and then went from 16 to 27% in 10 weeks. And so that's a big one, and I don't think people are going back. You know, grocery is a place where e-commerce is not good. Like they've struggled, and partly because, you know, people want to pick their own fruit and produce, and they enjoy going to the grocery store, and they don't want to pick a slot. And so I think there's an opportunity for significantly more penetration if you make the customer experience right with groceries. You know, if you think about price, selection, and fast delivery or convenience, you know, selection is something that you're always adding selection, but I don't think there's a big, you know, maybe 3D printing means you can do customizable selection, so that sort of increases your SKU count infinitely, but you know, no one's really doing that at scale. You know, we saw books on demand, print on demand was a big opportunity for selection. You know, fast delivery, obviously we talk about drones, you know, making batches even smaller and forward deploying them even closer to customers. Again, maybe that's not a disruption, that's just a continuous evolution. We had to, when I was at Amazon, every document you wrote, you had to have what are your disruptive ideas. We'd read those, and you know, 95% of them weren't actually disruptive. They were just sort of evolution of price selection and convenience. So I don't have a great answer to that, I guess.
I think that was very extensive. Actually, to share my own experience, I think it's very interesting. You mentioned groceries. I was living in the UK as a student, and in the UK, I think as in Ireland, the kind of smaller cities are built in a way where you have everything in the city center, and then you have residential areas going out. So if you live outside of the city center, it's a 20-minute walk to a grocery store, which doesn't seem huge. If you're a lazy student, it definitely is. And there was a very good infrastructure for ordering groceries to your house. So as a student, I can safely say that we probably very rarely went to an actual grocery store to pick up groceries, and it was fast, it was easy, and you didn't have to carry a huge amount of bags on the way back. So, and I am actually quite surprised, this was a solid 10 years ago, so I'm quite surprised that I haven't seen this outside of the UK. And I don't think it's very common in most other countries, and there's definitely, I would agree with you that there's definitely opportunity there.
Yeah, well, I grew up in downtown Detroit, and it was, you know, a fairly low income community. And we go to the grocery store, and the checkouts were like backed up all the way, you know, 15 people in line. You could take an hour to check out. I moved when I was 13, and we go to the grocery store in Columbia, Missouri, and like if there were more than 2 people in line, they would open up another cashier. And you know, I think that's, you know, social injustice is at the top of mind right now. I think that's another example. You get it, you know, if you start looking around, you find them every day. You know, people who have less money, have less convenience. And so it would be great to figure out how do we benchmark the experience for me, a white guy in the upper suburbs, you know, in a fancy suburb versus, you know, what people are experiencing in downtown Detroit, and then try to bring those all, you know, I'd rather bring those all up to the same par rather than sort of try to innovate for me.
Yeah. Fantastic. One more question coming from the audience. What are your thoughts on using B&M stores for fulfillment? Does Flex have an option for fulfillment, only for B&M stores?
We do. So we have an option for fulfillment out of our partners' buildings. We've talked about licensing our software to folks because it's a very lightweight WMS and inventory control system. There's a bunch of challenges with using stores. One is, you know, if you've got 1,000 stores or 4,000 stores, it's super complex, more than 15 fulfillment centers. But, you know, software can help you with some of that. But the one I haven't figured out is you have customers screwing up your inventory. So, you know, if you think about inventory management, if you're in a fulfillment center, the only people in there are employees, and they're picking inventory and they're cycle counting inventory. And so you have 99+% inventory record accuracy. You know, you hear stories, and I don't have the data, I only anecdotes, but like in the Gap, you know, maybe their inventory is 60%, their inventory record accuracy. Part of that is because if you sell someone a product, and then 3 days later you send them an email saying, oh, sorry, we don't have that product, that's a much bigger trust buster than if the customer walks around the store and can't find the product. So A, the bricks and mortar stores traditionally have been very lax in their inventory control. But B, even if you're like super tight, you're going to have customers who are picking the last can of tomato soup off the shelf and then walking to the register or putting it in their cart and walking around for another hour. So your inventory is destined to be wrong for that next hour because it's not on the shelf and it hasn't checked out yet. And so, there are some stores like Kroger announced that they were experimenting with dark store. So that's called, where you have, your stores and you have the same real estate and the same shelving, but you don't let customers in there. It's online fulfillment only. And so the only people in there are your own pickers. And they can scan the item off the shelf into the cart. And so you're always managing that inventory.
Very interesting. Fantastic. We are approaching the end of the hour we have allocated for this chat. If there are any final questions from the audience, please ask them now as we're kind of approaching conclusions. There are a few questions, David, that we ask all of our speakers throughout this series. And I think we've touched, and you've touched certainly through other questions on this one, but kind of just to summarize and highlight the main points. What are the trends in e-commerce you're seeing this year? How has the landscape changed, or how has it changed already? And what do you foresee coming in 2021? This could be technological changes, consumer behaviors, security, very wide kind of
Yeah, I mean, for years, Amazon has been chunking away and others have been chunking away at the brick and mortar, and people have been saying, oh, we can fulfill from our stores, or we're still, brick and mortar is still 80+% of all transactions, and sort of burying their head in the sand around e-commerce. And this year it's become very clear, both because there's a huge jump in adoption, but some folks have shut down their stores and they have zero revenue coming through their store. There's a cosmetics company, and they're like, look, we shut down all our stores, so all of our revenue is from e-commerce, and it's coming from one fulfillment center. And so if we have a COVID outbreak, even one case in that fulfillment center, they're going to shut it down for 2-3 days to clean it, and we have zero revenue at that point. And so I think people are going to have to both embrace e-commerce, and either through setting up their websites on Shopify, building their own in-house, outsourcing some piece to Amazon, listing their products on Amazon and elsewhere. People are going to have an e-commerce strategy. And we heard as COVID started, we got calls from folks who were saying, hey, we shut down our store. We need to store. We shut down our stores. We have this inventory on the water from China. We need to store that someplace. And then we had other people who actually hadn't invested in e-commerce, that our e-commerce is blowing up. Like, we need your help to scale that up. And people sort of, that was the first month. And then the second month, people were like, okay, we think we have a solution. We don't need your help yet. And then in month 4, they're like, oh, I think we do need your help. Like, we need to build something that's more sustainable than sort of hacking things together with our software out of our stores. And so I think you will see a continued, this year, people don't want to deploy capital because they don't know what's going on. They just want to survive. They sort of turtled and not having, big new projects. I think next year people get their feet under them and saying, hey, we do need to really dive into this e-commerce thing.
Awesome. And one very final question. So within your area of expertise, and this could be e-commerce more generally or fulfillment more specifically, what is one piece of content you'd recommend checking out? This could be a podcast, a book, an article, or a report that you found specifically interesting or impactful.
I've written a couple articles on operational excellence, so I recommend people read those. But what I find is anything I can read or watch that Jeff Bezos is featured in, I always learn something. So he was on Charlie Rose probably in 2007. He talked about pricing and how Amazon does pricing and competitive monitoring. he was on Charlie Rose Again, I think, or in 60 Minutes, talking about drones. There was a Harvard Business Review article, an interview with him where he shares a bunch of things. His commencement speech address, where the punchline was, "It's better to be kind than clever." But like anything you can read where you hear Jeff talking, or Elon Musk, or Bill Gates, but in particular Jeff Bezos, I think I learn something every time I hear or see him speak.
I've actually heard the interview with the Better to be kind than clever. It was very interesting.
Yeah.
Fantastic. I think this actually concludes all of our questions for today. So thank you so much, David, for joining us. It was really, really interesting. I think we've all learned a ton. Thank you to all of our attendees for joining in and for all of the very interesting questions. Quick reminder, this is part of a series of webinars. If you've missed some of the previous ones, they're all on YouTube, so you can check them out on the Zartis YouTube channel. We will make this one live there as well, probably next week, and so you can revisit the content. I think this is all we have for you today. So again, huge thanks for everyone for joining us, and David, a huge thank you for spending your morning with us. It was really interesting.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and thanks everyone for staying to the end.
Awesome. Have a wonderful day.
Take care.